While fishing at a secluded Minnesota cabin, John noticed movement near the tree line. A bobcat, wounded, wild, and watching him. Limping, desperate, yet unafraid. Moved by instinct, John offered part of his catch to the injured animal. What began as a small act of kindness turned into something remarkable. The bobcat started bringing him gifts, sticks, feathers, even discarded bottles, each carefully placed like a tribute of gratitude. As weeks turned into months, the bobcat suddenly disappeared. Following its tracks deep into the woods, John stumbled upon a secret he could never forget. And just when he thought the story was over, the bobcat returned with something so precious it brought tears to a man who believed he had nothing left to lose. Before we begin, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any new stories. The morning sun shattered across Mirror Lake, painting golden ribbons on a rippling surface as John Mitchell settled into his worn camping chair. At 72, his hands still knew the weight of a fishing rod as they knew the weight of memories. Both carried with practiced ease, both heavier than they looked. The rod in his grip was the same Fenwick he'd bought in 1969, just before leaving for Vietnam. Back then, he'd promised himself he'd catch a trophy bass with it when he came home. 53 years later, he was still keeping that promise, one cast at a time. The wooden cabin behind him, tucked among towering pines in northern Minnesota, had once belonged to his grandfather before it became his sanctuary. Since Margaret passed 3 winters ago, the solitude that once felt suffocating had softened into something like peace. The lake didn't ask questions. The fish didn't care about the tremor in his left hand or the nightmares that still came some nights. With practiced motion, John cast his line. The lure arced through the crisp morning air, landing with a gentle plop near a fallen log where the big ones like to linger. He'd been working that spot for a week, convinced a largemouth was hiding there, testing his patience. That's when he saw it. The movement in his peripheral vision was too precise for the wind, too large for a raccoon. John turned slowly, his body guided by years of instinct and caution. Just 20 feet away, half hidden behind a cluster of serviceberry bushes, crouched a bobcat, his breath caught. In 4 decades of fishing this lake, he'd seen black bears, deer, even a moose once, but never a bobcat this close. The creature was magnificent, with tufted ears, sharp features, and amber eyes that gleamed with an intelligence that made John's skin prickle. But something wasn't right. Its left shoulder hung at an unnatural angle. Dark stains clumped in the fur along its side. "Easy there," John whispered, knowing his voice would likely send it running. Yet the bobcat didn't move. It stayed fixed on him, eyes locked, chest rising in labored breaths, its weight uneven as it favored one leg. The silent standoff lasted no more than 30 seconds, though to John it stretched like minutes. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the cat turned and slipped back into the forest. Limping, John's hands trembled as he reeled in his line. He had seen enough wounded beings, human and animal alike, to recognize pain. That afternoon, fishing felt impossible. His mind replayed those amber eyes, the ragged movement, the heavy burden of its suffering as a young soldier in the Mekong Delta. John had learned one thing well. Suffering ignored would never leave you. By evening, he'd made his choice. He cleaned the 2 small bass he'd caught and placed half the meat on a flat stone at the clearing's edge where he'd first seen the bobcat. Foolish, perhaps. Biologists would scold him for it. But John had long since learned to trust his instincts when it came to creatures in need. The next morning, the fish was gone, and though he tried to tell himself otherwise, John found his eyes searching the tree line all day as he fished. Just before noon, he spotted movement again. It appeared again. The cat emerged from the same cluster of bushes, moving with that same painful deliberation. This time, though, it carried something in its mouth, a thick, gnarled branch, weathered by time. The bobcat placed it carefully about 10 feet from John's chair, then retreated to the shadows to watch. "Well, I'll be damned," John whispered. That evening, he left more fish, along with a crust from his sandwich. By the 3rd day, a rhythm had formed. John would leave food, and the bobcat would take it, always returning with something in exchange. A plastic water bottle one day, a mud-caked child's toy truck another. Each offering was placed in the same spot, like tributes at an altar. "Buddy," John said on the 5th day when the bobcat appeared with an old leather glove in its teeth. "That's what I'm going to call you, Buddy. Though, judging by your size, I suspect you might be a lady." As any wildlife expert would confirm, bobcats are solitary animals, fiercely independent and avoiding human contact at all costs. What was happening between John and this wounded cat defied everything the books said. But John knew from experience that trauma rewrites the rules for all creatures, be why the second week. Buddy had grown bolder, sometimes lingering in view while eating the fish John left. The limp had improved, though John could tell the shoulder was more likely dislocated than broken. Painful, yes, but survivable if infection stayed away and food was steady. That's where John came in. He'd begun catching extra fish just for Buddy, sometimes keeping only a small bass for himself and giving the rest to his unusual companion. The gifts continued, too. Feathers, pine cones, once even a muddy baseball that must have been lost in the woods for years. John collected them all, arranging them on a shelf inside his cabin. He'd started calling Buddy's gallery. My therapist would have a field day with this, he muttered one evening, placing a particularly large crow feather among the collection. He'd stopped seeing Dr. Patterson a year ago, convinced he'd gone as far as he could with therapy. Yet, this strange communion with a wounded wild creature felt like healing of a different kind. 3 weeks into their routine, John caught the largest bass he'd seen in years, nearly 6 pounds of fighting muscle that took 15 minutes to reel in. He admired the green bronze flanks glinting in the afternoon sun, then made a choice that would have horrified his younger self. He kept only enough for a single meal, leaving the rest, almost 4 pounds of prime fish, for Buddy. The bobcat must have sensed the offering's weight. Instead of vanishing as usual, Buddy sat at the edge of the clearing, eating while John watched from his chair. It was the closest they'd ever been, maybe 12 feet. John could see the fine details now. The black tuft on the ears, the pale patches on the face, the twitch of the stubby tail that almost seemed like contentment. "You're welcome," John said softly, and could have sworn Buddy gave a slow blink, the feline version of a smile. October came with sharp winds and painted leaves. John wore his heavy flannel jacket to fish in the mornings, while Buddy's coat grew thick in preparation for winter. The shoulder seemed fully healed now, though Buddy still favored the legs slightly. A limp that would likely remain that a bobcat, unable to hunt at full strength, wouldn't normally survive long in the wild. But Buddy had adapted, and more importantly, had found a dependable food source in John's daily catches. Then one morning, Buddy didn't come. John waited through breakfast, lunch, and into the fading afternoon. No movement in the serviceberry bushes. No gifts at the altar spot. By evening, a cold knot formed in his gut. It was the same feeling he'd known on patrol overseas, when silence meant danger and something unseen pressed in from the dark. The next morning, still no Buddy. John barely touched his coffee, his thoughts racing. Had the injury finally turned septic? Had winter claimed its toll too soon? Had it gone too far and couldn't make it back? Or worse? John's jaw tightened. Had someone else found Buddy? Unable to sit still, he grabbed his walking stick and headed into the woods. Buddy usually came from the northeast, where the forest thickened with undergrowth. As John pushed through brambles, memories of jungle patrols returned unbidden. Different forests, same sharp-edged vigilance. Near a clearing about a quarter-mile from his cabin, movement caught his eye. But it wasn't Buddy. It was a man in camouflage, carrying a rifle and a pole with a loop at the end, a trapper's snare. John's blood ran cold. He slipped behind an oak, watching as the man knelt. From his motions, John could tell he was checking a trap. Minnesota had strict rules, and bobcat season didn't open until December. This wasn't legal. This was a poacher. Keeping his distance, John shadowed him. The man checked several traps, and at the fourth sight, John's fear crystallized. Buddy was there, his left paw clamped in steel jaws, eyes wide with pain and terror. The poacher approached with a control pole, pulling out a cloth sack. Not a quick, humane dispatch, but preparation for a live capture. The illegal fur trade, John realized with disgust. Exotic pets, prime winter pelts. People paid obscene amounts. The man forced Buddy into a wire cage. The bobcat yowled, a sound that ripped through John's chest. He followed as the poacher loaded the cage onto an ATV and drove deeper into the woods point 20 minutes later. They stopped at a rundown shack that made John's own cabin look like a palace. The man disappeared inside, then returned to haul Buddy's cage into a leaning barn. John crept closer, instincts he hadn't used in 50 years guiding every move. Through a gap in the siding, his stomach turned. Cages lined the walls, raccoons, a fox, and in the far corner, another bobcat. All illegal, all bound for the black market. He backed away, pulling out his phone once he was clear. 911 patched him to the Department of Natural Resources. John gave coordinates, described the barn, and was told officers would arrive within the hour. But an hour was too long. John had seen Buddy's paw crushed in that trap, seen the fear in those amber eyes. If officials took him, even as a rescue, he'd be sent to rehabilitation. With a permanent limp, Buddy would likely be ruled non-releasable. And non-releasable bobcats, unless placed in educational programs, were usually euthanized. S.O. John made another decision. Dr. Patterson might have called it processing trauma through action. Others might have called it breaking and entering. The poacher had left, likely checking more lines. John approached the barn. A simple padlock secured the door. His lock-picking skills were rusty, but a padlock was a padlock, whether on a barn in Minnesota or supplies shed in Danang. Inside, the smell hit first. Fear, filth, and desperation. The animals shrank in their cages, except Buddy, who perked up the moment John appeared. "Hey there, friend," John whispered, working the latch on Buddy's cage. "Let's get you out of here." Buddy's paw was swollen but not broken. The trap had been padded to protect the fur's value. The second the cage swung open, Buddy shot out, bolting for the door. He paused once, looking back at John, before vanishing into the trees. John didn't stop. He opened the other cages too, watching as raccoons scattered and the fox slipped into the night.